Checked. Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin in 5 minutes, so please go ahead and take your seats. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Good Friday morning. I hear the exchange sessions this morning were excellent. Good. And from all accounts, yesterday was also a good day for everyone. It's been, the feedback has been tremendous. We appreciate it so much. Some of the highlights from yesterday, I recall, there was a lot of conversation about the nonprofit industrial complex. Y'all know what that means. And what it means for anything that's industrial and or complex means that it's got a lot of moving parts, and all of those moving parts are connected, and we have to figure out which is the right thread to pull to affect the most parts for the change we want to see. So I know you're all continue to think about that, but the exhortation has been to think about that more deliberately, more intentionally, and more together. Everybody's doing their thing within that complex, but how do we do something more collective and more joint? And then I forget the young lady's name that was from North Carolina that was on the panel, Robert Wood Johnson, who introduced the Zoe, thank you. And the term she introduced, VUCA. And so volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so as I was listening to Kyle respond to Zoe about that, I did my own little leadership kick in the pants, because I was thinking, how could Kyle have worked with me for 7 years and Bruce Byington for almost 5 years, and we never told him about VUCA? We talked about that, Bruce and I talked about it all the time, so that's a leadership do-over in my head. How to use stories was also a huge, people took a lot from that and reframed what stories can be used for, and how stories can be used to hear the opinions, particularly that we don't want to hear. That's the way to get at those data. That is an inviting way to engage in conversation. And then I was not there last night, but the media panel, I heard last night had a lot of good attendance and brought out a lot of good points, and that the session we added at the last minute for the facilitated conversations around what's the role of white folks in dismantling racism, that was well attended and that people got a lot out of that. So I'm so glad that we were able to do that and offer that. Now, everybody that knows me knows my favorite party of the year is a symposium dance party. And the fact that I missed it, y'all know I was sick. That was the only reason I missed it. But people kept sending me, I got video. I got lots of video through the night of people. And y'all are probably trending somewhere on that dastardly Facebook or Twitter and that algorithm, because I saw a lot of posts, some Facebook posts of a lot of the dancing last night. And I want to tell you, our security people said to our staff, the security people looked at you all and said, okay, there's an open bar, there's a DJ, there's lots of people, there's no drama, there are no fights, there's no throwing up. This is a great group of people. So, perspective matters. Somebody, it's their job to notice how well behaved you were, and still having a great time together. And so even though I wasn't there, I still got a lot of video and got a lot of feedback, so the dance prize winners is still gonna happen. But since I wasn't there, the winners, y'all gonna have to come up here and show me what you're working with. All right, So the following people need to stand up and join me on the stage. Phyllis Albritton. Sean Hayes. Sean is a perennial winner. Aaron Mittenberger. Aaron's a perennial winner. Anybody that's here from the band, the Reminders, because I heard y'all were getting down too. Anybody from the Reminders still here? Come on up. And I know Cassandra Owen is not here. So the three of you, and I'll go ahead and tell you what they're going to win. They'll get a $1,000 donation to the nonprofit of their choice in Colorado. And then we have two Colorado Health Foundation staff members who will get 2 extra days of PTO. And those people are Ashley Clevenger and Tomas Gallegos. So come on up. Come on. All right, Jeremy, hit me with some music. Thank you.
We missed you.
All right. That's what I'm talking about. That's how we should start every morning at work. Every morning at work. All right, that was wonderful. Thank you. So a couple of reminders. We have, as an incentive to keep you here till 11:45, you have on the back, put your name, address, email on a card. We will do a drawing. Well, I think we do 3 or 4 drawings at the end. If your name is drawn, then you will receive a $5,000 donation to the nonprofit of your choice. But you must be here to win. So with that good, invigorating start to this morning, I'm going to now turn it over to the equally invigorating Maribel Cifuentes, who's going to introduce our first panel this morning and get us going. Thank you all.
Done. Good morning, everyone. Maribel Cifuentes, buenos días a todos. Muchísimas gracias a todas las personas que están aquí, que hablan español, que nos acompañaron para esta conferencia. Muchas gracias. Estoy feliz de verlos a todos. I'm so happy that you are all here. Special shout out to those of you who speak Spanish who joined us at this conference, and to the amazing team of CLC who provided interpretation for us. Shout out to them. Well, I am so excited this morning because I get to have what I think will be a really, really wonderful closing conversation with three amazing people that I got to know a little bit better here at the symposium. So I'm just so we to be joined today by Lourdes Meinhold, by Jessica Holguin, and Matt Carcoot. And we are actually, rather than me telling you about them, we are going to start by asking them to just tell you a little bit about themselves and sort of, who they are, what they do, what's their story at a personal level, and also what called them to this work. So we're gonna go ahead and start with that, if that's okay. We'll start with Lourdes.
Great. Thank you. Such an honor to be with all of you here today. My name is Lourdes Meinhold. I'm the director of Caring for Denver Foundation. I have a challenge keeping a job. So I have been in the nonprofit sector for a very long time. So I have started a foundation, had the great opportunity to work with the Health Foundation, as well as serve under two governors, worked for the Medicaid agency as a deputy director, and then did some nonprofit consulting. And all of that led me to where I am today, which is leveraging all of those skills and opportunities to create a change in mental health and substance misuse. So Caring for Denver was created out of a ballot initiative in 2018. It raised sales tax by 0.25% to fund and improve mental health and substance misuse in the city and county of Denver. And we've had this great opportunity over this last 3 years to give away $82 million to over 200 organizations. And many are in this room, so I'm super excited. And then what I would say, what brought me to this work, what has been consistent through everything that I've done is creating change, is disrupting. That we really need to center everything we do around people and people's needs, and how do we do that? And how do we really step into that place and make sure that we create systems, organizations that work better for people, because that's ultimately what it's all about. And I really say that it's working with people to create systems that work for them, not doing it to people. And so that's super important, no matter what sector you're in, is how do you center everything around the voice of community. So thank you.
Jessica?
Thank you. Muy buenos días. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica Holguin. I'm the Executive Director of Center for Community Wealth Building. And as I think about systems, I think I've always been a disruptor. I was trying to think back of the first time that I disrupted a system. And I think it was when I was 5 years old, and I was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wanted to become a priest. And the nun said, oh, sweetie, you can't become a priest. I was like, why not? My mom said I can be anything I want to be. And she said, no, but you can be a nun. And I was like, you have no power. Nobody listens to you. It was not a good day in my family, my Catholic family. But it was in that moment that I realized that the priest had a lot of power. Every Sunday, he had a captive audience that would listen. And I recognized that at a very young age. Now, fast forward, I ended up, I was the first one in my family to go to college. I ended up running away from domestic violence. And so it truly is the lived experience that has truly driven this passion to be here. Having had such a difficult time navigating the college environment and scholarships. I grew up in a very low-income family, and so the thought of even having to pay for college was so overwhelming that at one point I was like, what do other students like me do? So I ended up doing a lot of work because I felt like if I can break the cycle of poverty through education, that's how we can actually get more opportunities in my community, in our communities. And so I dedicated the first 12 years of my life to developing programs for students who looked like me, who had ambition and a lot of drive, but didn't necessarily have the resources. My parents didn't go to college, so all of that was completely new to them. And in 2011, my partner and I decided to quit our dream jobs and join the Peace Corps. Everyone in the world, or a lot of people thought we were out of our minds. Why? You made it. Why would you go back into poverty? And to me, it was a privilege to be able to say, I can go and I can support others. You see, I thought I was going to be helping people. Little did I know that I would be helped so much more. And so everything that I've done is truly to challenge the system and to look at ways in which we can ensure that our economic opportunities can be at the core of what we do. And so ended up coming back in 2017, and I took on this amazing job that would provide the opportunity to study what it would take to build community wealth. And then at a month 2, I realized we don't have a year to study this problem. Things are moving very quickly. And so it truly is my lived experience, my personal connection to my communities, having grown up in a low-income community and in the most polluted zip code in the nation, that has driven everything that I do to continue to advance economic opportunities for others. And I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you, Jessica. Matt, tell us about you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Buenos días a todos. Bon dia. Algunos brasileiros aqui. Bonjour à tous les francophones. Les gens du Sénégal, je vous ai écouté. My name is Matt, and I'm going to answer the question that I know you're all wondering. No, I did not get lost on the way to senior prom or a wedding or something. I'm wearing this suit because I'm from the western part of Colorado. Anybody else here from the western slope? And western slope people, do we dress up? You're right, it's a trick question, we don't. It's like you go to somebody's wedding, you look to your left, somebody's wearing sweaty gym shorts. You look to the right, somebody's wearing a bike helmet. It's like you feel like you're inside an REI outlet catalog or something. So when I got the opportunity to come here and talk, I was so happy because I knew it would be the one time in 4 years that I've ever been able to wear a suit for something for work. But there's more to me than just making weird jokes about suits on stage, you know? For work, for example, I have the privilege of working at an amazing organization in Durango, Colorado, an immigrant resource center. It's called Compañeros, and it's a one-stop shop for any and all type of service that our immigrant community could want. Helping with driver's licenses, with COVID vaccines, this year with helping a trailer park, helping the residents and supporting them in forming a legal cooperative, getting financing to buy that trailer park, to keep themselves from being evicted and take ownership of where they live. I'm a bit of a new person to the nonprofit sector. I hear people up here talking about being in this sector for 20-something years or something. I've been in it for 4 years, and I think I still have a bit of an outsider's perspective. I'm also on the board of the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition and the Chinook Fund, based in Denver, a social justice change-making organization. But I have a different perspective on how this sector works, and I think being an ED and working in a rural part of the state for a community that's often overlooked, my perspective on how this works and how this whole world that we live in the nonprofit and philanthropic sector, it's definitely a strange world. And I hope today to share some insights with you and ideas about how we can move forward and change the status quo.
Yes.
There, I said it. It's like when you're watching the movie and you're waiting for them to say the title of the movie in the movie. But a bit about me, I'm originally from Salt Lake City, Utah. I grew up there. My mom is an adoptee from South Korea. She was born in Seoul in the years following the Korean War. My father is from New York, and I went to Pomona College. I studied politics, philosophy, economics. And really what drove me to go into work like this was same thing, kind of like Lorez. I had trouble holding down a job, and for my several years after college, I dabbled in everything from English teaching as a second language in foreign countries, trip guiding for trips of teenagers in Latin American countries, interpretation and translation. I was interpreter / Uber driver for refugees in Salt Lake City. I drive Cubans to the doctor, hang out, chat, talk about all sorts of things. And I really kind of came to Durango by chance with my girlfriend Cassandra, who you may have seen dancing last night a little bit. She was the one Karen was talking about. But I started volunteering at the organization where I now work and helping with all the intakes, all the forms, all the papers, everything from scratch, doing all the services. And a couple months in, the director said, hey, I'm thinking of moving on and would you like to maybe have my job? And I said, well, okay. And I've been there ever since. And through these years, I've been really lucky to get to know a lot of people in this room and have the support of so many people I see, from the Colorado Health Foundation to the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado to the Rocky Mountain Health Foundation. I've seen a lot of you and others here. And in the last 4 years, we've been able to grow this organization from a one-person thing, with me running around with like so many hats on my head that I couldn't keep them on, to a team of 3 full-time staff, to having 2 or 3 other part-time AmeriCorps interns per year, to do all these great things and to try to make an impact on our community. So glad to be here.
Thanks so much, Matt. Thank you all for being here with us today. So now that you know them a little bit better, you will understand why we invited them for this last part of the conversation. So over the 3 days, right, we've talked about changing the system at different levels. Day 1, really very much at an individual level, human system. We talked about community systems in day 2, and then today, these amazing panelists are gonna talk about sort of that macro level, right? Big systems change. And they're gonna talk about it from these very rich perspective that they just shared with you. So as we think about what does it mean to disrupt, dismantle, and replace, right? Big systems. In order to really change the status quo, we understand that, first of all, it's a game, and we need to both understand the rules, and then we have to be able to change the rules, right? To create that equitable future that we all want to see. So the first question that I want everybody to speak to is, what does that mean to you when you think about changing the status quo and changing the rules of the game? What do you think about?
I will jump right in. What I would say is currently the status quo is really grounded in maintaining the power imbalances that exist in our society. And to change that means that we all have to use our powers and our resources to move the needle, to create the change we want. And whether that's systemically, organizationally, or individually, we all have power. And what I will say is the status quo wants you not to believe that, wants to undermine that. And our power exists in both our words and our actions, our voice and our actions. And so it's on us to use our power and resources to fight the fight. And what I'll say is, as a foundation, especially with a foundation with privilege, that is our role and responsibility, as well as everybody in the room.
Thank you. So for me, I'm committed to changing our economic system. For us, for our communities, it has been way too long. You know, some people say, well, the system is just not working. But I correct them because the system is working exactly as it was designed to work. It's about extractive economics. It is about taking advantage of our labor. It is about building our economy on the backs of Black and brown people. People of color have built this country, and yet we continue to be impacted by economic conditions. You know, some people said, you know, our economy is doing great. Now for our communities continue to struggle to this day, and we need to do something about it. This system is not doing good. This system is actually, it's not just impacting people of color. At the end of the day, this is a race to the bottom that's gonna impact every single one of you and every single one of us. And so we need to make sure that we're disrupting this system, because at the end of the day, we're all gonna be impacted. So the way that we do that is through 3 basic strategies. One is democratizing ownership. We truly believe that those who are actually creating the profit should be the ones to benefit from it. That's supposed to be radical. I don't know why. This is about creating an economy that works for all. And so we truly believe that when people actually have the ownership, that they can make the best decisions for themselves. We truly believe in strengthening opportunities for people of color, especially entrepreneurship opportunities. And so we work with small businesses to help them connect to new markets. And we do it through our 3rd strategy, which is engaging anchor institutions. We truly believe that the power of these place-based institutions, if you think about hospitals, universities, municipalities, our school districts, they're getting our tax dollars. And they're supposed to have a social mission to support our communities. And so what if, I know I'm being radical here, but what if we were to actually align the business practices with the mission that we want to see? It's really not that radical at all, right? But what if we were to actually create opportunities for people to actually do business with these entities? Just imagine for a second, even if we're looking at janitorial services, wouldn't it be better for this contract to go to the locally owned, worker-owned cooperative so that those profits can stay in their own community? Because what happens right now is that all of these RFPs look very beautiful and there's a whole process behind them. It is out-of-state corporations that end up getting these contracts, and what do? They come and they hire our people for minimum wage. When this is our tax dollars that are supposed to be at work for our people. What if we were to all come together and say, this is not okay, and this is no longer enough? And so I am here to invite you all, because at the end of the day, the work that we're doing is going to require every single one of you to ask the question, why is it being done this way? And is there a better way to do it? At the end of the day, it's going to fall on every single one of us to make sure that we're making change happen. Because let me tell you something, power concedes nothing without a struggle. And unless we're willing to stand up and say, this is no longer enough, this is no longer good enough for our communities, we're going to continue to be here 10, 20, 30 years from now. I also want to share that this economy was built intentionally through extractive practices. And there are policies that actually help create the middle class that intentionally excluded people of color. And so when people tell me, but why do you focus on people of color? It is because if we can actually focus on those who have been most vulnerable, we can actually make change happen for everybody. When we're lowering the barriers of opportunity, we can actually make it happen. So I am so glad you're here today so that we can actually take this on and actually create an economy that works for all. Thank you.
When I think about changing the status quo and making something that works for everyone, that works for all of us, I think about it within the nonprofit sector, within the philanthropic sector. Because as it currently stands, there are lots of rules and practices, lots of ways of doing things, a status quo, so to speak, of how we make funding available or how we restrict it, of how we receive funding, how we're allowed to spend it, how we're not, how we're allowed to treat our employees, how much we're allowed to pay them. There's all these things that influence each one of our jobs, probably. Most of us in this room, or many of us, work in nonprofits, we work in philanthropy, and we're subject to all of these rules. The result of them is that we have certain types of people who can succeed in this type of sector, who can be predisposed to success in the realm of grant writing, in the realm of running organizations, all the loops and hoops that you have to jump through to be successful. And then you have people who are at a disadvantage because of how the system is made. I believe that with everything we're working on, all these causes, all these issues in our state, in our country, in our communities that we're working on, it's a thing that I think our sector and our world is waking up to, that the people most closely associated with those issues, the ones with lived experience, the ones who know what it's about, are the best ones to be able to find solutions to them. But our sector right now, it doesn't enable the leadership of everyone. It enables the leadership and the success of people who are able to go through the rules of the nonprofit sector. And until we change those rules, until we change the way that funding is made and how we change the rules and how it's able to be used, we're going to be stuck with it how it is now. I really like music. I really love hip hop. There's an old refrain in a lot of stuff that the best rapper out there is probably somewhere stacking produce. The idea is that people have talent, people have dreams, people have ambition and skill, but many times the systems that they operate within don't allow them to actually have success. They don't allow them to have the luck or the resources or the access to the power that they need to realize what they have in their heart and their mind, whether it's a song, whether it's an album, or whether it's a community center or a program. I want to talk today in this talk about real tangible things that we can do to change those things. And as Jessica said, it comes down to us. We have power. We can advocate for these changes. All of the funders in this room, you can make these changes. You can change the way you fund and support organizations. And all the organizations in this room too, you can push back and you can ask for these changes. I think we have this power dynamic where we feel we can't raise our voice sometimes because we don't want to get the rug pulled out from under us. And I think a lot of us have probably had that experience before, where for some arbitrary reason we were denied funding or cut off from something. It could have been that a funding priority of your funder changed, or that they met one of your board members and didn't like them. It could be that they didn't like your joke about suits because they work at a tailor or something. You know? You never know. But until we change those rules, we'll be having the status quo as it is. But the exciting thing is we can change it, and it's up to us. And I believe we're making progress.
Thank you all. So I forgot to say that, of course, every one of you is going to get the opportunity to also ask questions from the panelists. So each of you has cards on your table, and they'll be passed out. Be thinking about what your questions are, write them down, they'll be collected, and they'll come up to the stage when we get to the Q&A session. But piggybacking on all the thoughts and ideas that you've put out there, you know, this idea of connection and relationship, right, is so, so important. You talked about it, Matt. I think all of you talked about it in one way or another. So I love, you know, this is also hard work that takes a long time. So this, you know, the beautiful African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, right, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So thinking about that, what do you think about the role of connection and relationships as a key tool to really create those systemic changes and those systemic solutions that we're all looking for? We'll start with Matt, and we'll go this way.
Okay. I think something very important is the connection with the community. I think something very important is the connection between the funder and the community, or the funder and the organization doing the work. I think that in this sector, too often we have a relationship of unequal power. We have a relationship of the funder paternalistically determining the priorities, telling the organization what to do, how to do it, what money can be spent on, what it can't be spent on. And we also have it for a short-term thing. It's not a long-term relationship many times. It's something where you get a grant for a year, and they say, well, here it's for a year, and then after that, well, talk to us again, maybe we'll do it, maybe not. I think relationships, in the way I see them in our sector, and something that I want to see change, is that commitment between funders and organizations. I want to see partnership more than just this power dynamic of asking for the money and then getting it and having all these rules. I want to see working together, talking about how we can look at an issue from the same side of the table and find a solution that works for everybody. I'm talking about commitment, and in real terms, I'm talking about long-term grants, I'm talking about bigger grants, I'm talking about endowments, and I'm talking about funders making real commitments to the organizations they support so that we can put the energy and the funding and the resources into long-term, stable programs, you know, well-supported, happy staff that care for themselves, who feel content doing the work that they want to do. I'm talking about a healthy relationship and a partnership.
Thank you. I think another component that we have to think about is how we build collaborative efforts. I truly believe in the power of the collective. I come from a community organizing background where I know that I, as an individual, might be able to accomplish this much. But if I can bring 10 of my closest friends to work towards something, we can make change happen. And I use this as a model for the organization because at the end of the day, unless we're actually connected and actually bringing the voices of those who haven't traditionally been included, we're bound to replicate the same systems of oppression. And so we have some really, really good examples of how we come together as collaborators, as individuals coming together to work towards a goal. But I think one of the biggest ones the biggest success has really been in working with other organizations. Let me tell you, the funders who are in the room, you all have done a great job at dividing and conquering, whether intentional or not. There has been a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of competition because, well, who's going to get the credit for that? And so there was one project where we came together to support businesses, and I just started inviting organizations. We're a very small organization. We don't have the resources to duplicate efforts, so let's figure it out. So a lot of our work is at the ecosystem level because we want to create strong ecosystems so that our communities can have what they need. And so we went to one of the organizations. I was like, I talked to the executive director. I was like, would you be willing to partner? And she's like, actually, no. My funders care when I have the credit. And I was like, take it. I don't care. If this is about credit, if it means providing better services, take the credit. And they did. But that's okay, because the moment that we stop caring about the credit and actually care about those individuals who are our constituents, our partners in this effort, if we focus on their needs, something amazing will happen. So in 2020, when the racial uprisings were happening, a lot of faith institutions came to us and they said, I have my Black Lives Matter statement. And we said, that's great. And yet a statement means nothing without action. And so what are going to be your actions? Tell me how you're going to be spending your money. Tell me how you're going to be shifting your spend to ensure that people of color can actually benefit, because your words mean nothing. And so we ended up developing a collaborative, a Co-Purchase Colorado, which is a group of faith-based institutions that have an economic power, to help them shift some of those, to identify where they're spending their money, and then identifying the businesses that could potentially be those contractors. And one of the things that we found was that there were so many people who were interested. They're like, yes, we want to do this, but we're not willing to go the extra mile to identify those businesses. And so at the same time, I kept hearing this, I was like, somebody needs to bring a collective together to develop this. And everybody was like, nope, we got way too much to do. And so at the end of the day, I was like, okay, we're going to have to do this. So we brought together a group of 12 organizations to come together to co-develop shopbipoc.com. It is now going to be in the front range, but we're hoping that once the tool is developed, the platform is developed, it can be statewide. And this is going to be a way for people to search for businesses by industry, by zip code, so that we can make it as easy as possible, removing all of the barriers so that you don't say, well, I wish I could support more businesses, but I don't know where they are. So there won't be an excuse for that. So if you all go shopbipoc.com, and right now there's a coming soon page. You can add your information, and then we can send you an email once it goes live. But it is about those collaborative efforts. So it's being branded as shopbipoc.com. This is not about community wealth building. This is not about other entities, because we know that through collective power, we can do so much more than doing it as myself, as Jessica, as community wealth building. There are way too many directories that are already underutilized, are incomplete, and so if we can come together to actually co-create this, we can have something that's gonna work for our communities. But at the end of the day, let's be honest, the other side has a lot of money. And so it is our people that will be our strongest asset, that has been our strongest asset. And so how do we organize our people to make sure that what may seem as unattainable at the moment, something like systems change, can actually happen? And that starts by dividing the issue in a way that makes sense for our communities. Let's have that first win, because that will then encourage us to go for something a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. Amazing things happen when we can feel our own power, and when we know that our power is contributing to something much greater than ourselves.
So not to be repetitive, but I think partnerships and collaboration, it's key. If we really want to create the change, it's through those partnerships. Together, we're stronger. You've heard that from all of us. But they are hard. Partnerships are not easy. You have to align around values. You have to align around strategies, around how you share power, how you make decisions together. And as we want to feel in these partnerships that we're respected, understood, and trusted. No different than any other relationships. It's like dating. It is the same. It's how do we build relationships in anything we do in life? And those relationships can exist with funders as well. I think it's really, sometimes we focus so much on the power dynamic, but what you have to fundamentally realize, what you have to understand is, as a foundation, I'm only good as the impact I have. And that impact comes from investments in organizations, in nonprofits, and leaders. I need you almost more than you need me. And it's important not to just to default, they have all the power. Again, this is shared. How do we come together around the things that we care about. How do we lift up community, community voice, community expertise, community knowledge? How do we create flexibility in those fundings so that you can do the work that you want to do, that you can show up in this partnership as you are, not fit in an artificial box or some solution that doesn't reflect your community, your culture, your identity. And so that's really, truly what is important. And what I'll also say is we can't forget those individual connections. We can't forget compassion and humanity. It's us that is going to create the change. We are the tools to create the change.
Okay, so the questions are starting to flow in, and I'd like to incorporate one into our next conversation. So it's a question about data. And the question is, so many decisions are based on data or data-driven, right? Can each of you speak about the data process from the design, collection, analysis, and interpretation? And how should that process be changed in order for us to achieve that systemic change that we want to see?
I can take a stab at it. So yes, data has been one of our biggest barriers. When we first started working with these place-based institutions, our anchor institutions, we went up to our universities and said, how much money are you spending with businesses owned by people of color? And they're like, well, we don't track that. How much money is being spent in really anything? They were like, well, we don't really track. We track it, but it's very, very high level. We only track if the businesses are certified. We only track if they've gone through this rigorous and expensive process. We know that our communities are not necessarily going to do that. And so the first thing that we did, the first thing that we've done is we were able to convince a couple of universities to give us their data on basically their credit card data. And then we took that on and ended up analyzing to identify where the lowest hanging fruit was. And as we all know, we spend a lot of money on food. And so we recognize that a lot of these institutions have lunch meetings and student events. And so we saw this as a really good opportunity. And so we were able to connect the universities to the local caterers so that they would once again build that relationship and ensure that they were using, instead of using the very large corporation, that they were actually supporting the businesses in the community. It ended up being a really good event. We actually hosted two of them, one right before the pandemic hit. It was funny to think that our biggest worry in February of 2020 was that there was a big snowstorm coming, and we're like, we're never doing this in February again. Little did we know that the world would be changed in unprecedented ways. But it was truly trying to identify how we start to track those connections. We have heard from our entrepreneurs that they continue to get jobs from the universities, and for some of them, 80% of their business now comes from that connection, from the businesses. Yeah, and it's great, right? It's something so easy. And what was interesting is that a lot of the universities felt like there was a pretty big risk in using a business-owned, local business. What we did is that we worked with the businesses to help them also understand how to work with this large institution, the level of insurance required, the information that they needed to provide, how to do invoicing for tax-exempt organizations. At the same time, we were working with the university to help them understand how to work with businesses in our communities. And so now we're in the process of tracking that through the university side. Earlier, I believe it was last year, our anchor strategy director said, what if we were to track through W-9s? You all require that every year of vendors. And so one of our institutions said, that's a good idea. Let's propose the questions. So we did, and they accepted them. And so now they're tracking data based on the W-9 so that we can have more just additional data as to where that baseline is, because then from there we can start setting those goals and ensure that we're seeing progress. We're seeing progress now, but if we have the numbers to be able to justify it, then we can then go to other entities and convince them, because it's not easy. But yeah, thanks, Jessica.
I'd share something about data too. I think that obsession with data is another thing that sometimes comes from the top but doesn't really relate to the organizations doing the work. This is something that, and there you go, yeah. I like it when I like it when you say something and it resonates because it makes you feel like you're not alone in your experience. But in our organization, our communities are rural enclaves, rural communities of immigrants living in Southwest Colorado, a lot of folks from Latin America, a lot of folks who are undocumented. And that's a group of people that we don't have information on. There are people in this country who don't appear in the census, who don't appear in official statistics about population, demographic, age, gender, anything like that. And a lot of the times funders will ask us, well, how many people are there exactly? Tell us what race they are, which is a word I don't like when trying to think about who is a person, what defines them, what are their ages, what are their incomes. And the truth is, that data does not exist for us many times. And the same thing with our outcome data. Many times we in our center, we support people with so many things. There is no clear outcome. There is no clear yes or no. There is no clear accomplishment to measure. And even if we were to measure it, there are privacy concerns for the people we work with who don't want to give their data out and have it floating around in the world. These are people who are being actively persecuted and chased by the government who's trying to remove them. They don't want to give us their information. They don't want that data in any database. We want to respect them for that. And I think a funder who wants to support us and work with us, and I've had this happen before where they say, well, we need more data, and I say, we can't and we're not going to, because that's not what our community wants. And I think that changing that angle of how the funder, how the organization, how we see data as an important tool, but as something that can exist in many kinds of forms. Some of the best data that we have about our programs, our evaluations that we do, it's from random conversations, random interviews, random little chats that we have when we run into our community members at the store or at the gym or at the restaurant. It's conversations, informal, just communication that has so much insight in it. I think what I want to see is funders and those with money, those who are letting us do this work, who are supporting it, understanding that not all of us have the same kind of data and being able to make accommodations for what we can provide so that we can give them information and tell them what we're doing, but do it in a way that is respectful of what our community wants and the needs that they have.
So building off of what Matt has said, and in my many careers, we understand that. We understand that some of the best information is in stories. And so a huge part of our learning, and we don't really call it so much data, we're about learning. And learning means working with the grantee to figure out what's important to them. What is it that they really want to understand, and what do they want to measure to show impact? And it can look like a lot of different things, and we help the grantees build a learning framework so that we can also shift from, sometimes when I was a nonprofit, I would do this all the time. I would talk about what I did in the process of what I did, and I would get that, so what? And so how do we turn our passion and our process into a story of the impact we're having? And that's not through data and metrics, because a lot of the communities we're working with aren't reflected in our data and metrics. We don't talk about evidence-based, evidence-informed in our practices. We talk about what's community-informed, what works for that community. And community is not homogeneous. It's multiple identities and how people show up, and there's many sizes fits all, so there has to be many different ways that we look at and measure and lift up learning. And we also recognize this is a paradigm shift. You know, when you first tell somebody, hey, don't worry, we're not gonna tell you what to measure, they're like, are you kidding me? That's amazing. And then fear comes in. What do you mean? I don't know what to measure. I don't know how to do this. And so we try to surround them both with our staff and other resources to build something that works for them. And then we check in about that and make sure, and if it needs to evolve, it evolves. That's how we learn, that's how we lift up learnings, that's how we show impact, and that's how we change what we're doing to really reflect what community wants and needs.
Thank you all. So the next question is one we had thought about already, and I'm gonna sort of incorporate it with a question from the audience too, and it's specifically about the philanthropic sector, right? The philanthropic sector in and of itself is also part of a very deeply rooted system, and all of you have already started sort of going that way, right? What are some of the key change in rules, shifts in power, mindset, practice, and processes that the philanthropic sector can make, right, to more positively move towards that, changing that status quo and changing its own system. So I'm going to ask you to come at that question with a practicality in terms of what would be some practical advice that you would give to funders in the room that they could put into practice tomorrow when they go back. Well, tomorrow's Saturday, so maybe Monday when we go back to the office.
Yeah, first of all, don't work on Saturday if you don't have to. We want to get rid of that culture too. But I'll tell you, I think there are very many things that we could change today, both from the funder side and the organizational side. But I think a lot of it comes from the funder side. We have to, as organizations, at the end of the day, we got to have some more money and we got to have some more autonomy on how to spend it. And as a foundation, you can support that. You can trust us. I think that's the biggest word I want to just put out into the universe right now. Trust. You can trust us to do a good job, to do our work, to not impose as many restrictions on us, to not impose as much reporting or tedious application, to trust us in partnership to do what we're doing. I'm talking about big grants rather than small ones where we have to scramble and try to find other funding. I'm talking about multi-year grants rather than just short-term ones so that we can offer people full-time, long-term positions rather than short ones that are going to disappear at any moment's notice. I'm talking about unrestricted grants. Unrestricted grants. Now I know, you funders, you have priorities. You want to work on what you want to work on. And sometimes, in some cases, you do have money that has a restriction from government or state, and that's okay. I understand that, and I respect that. But if you can make general operating grants, it's way better for us. I don't have to make, if I get a general operating grant, I don't have to worry about who's paying for the pencils in the office. I don't have to worry about who's paying for the internet. I don't have to worry about who's paying for my staff, right? It's way more helpful. And I think that it comes from the shift in thinking of programs and overhead to just think it's all the same thing. I mean, it's all the same thing, okay? And if you funders support us more in that way, if you extend more funding to us for longer term with more flexibility on what we can do with it, if you trust us in a committed partnership, then on our side, we can do a lot of stuff to be more effective too. Instead of having a mentality of scarcity, we can have a mentality of abundance. We can pay our staff living wages. How about that? Who here wants a living wage, right? I know I do. We can give people benefits. We can give people health care, retirement. We can give them paternal or maternal parental leave. We can give them flexibility in where to work and when so that we can have caregivers and parents work with us too. But we need you first to give us that flexibility, to give us that trust, and to give us that commitment.
Yes to all of that, definitely, and I won't repeat that, but one of the things that when I started Center for Community Wealth Building, I'll be honest, I was like, I do not want another nonprofit, and yet we couldn't find the right fit for the individual work in communities, the ecosystem level work, and then ultimately the systems change. We were told that we were too radical, that we couldn't push the systems too much because others were at risk of losing funding. Think about that. When our very own money in our communities can be threatened when we challenge the system, there's something wrong with that. So when I then decided that we had to go the C3 route, and I told the board, we don't want to exist in perpetuity. I want to be able to say, here's the community wealth building lens, here's economic justice and how it can work. I want you all to adopt it so we don't have to exist. I don't want to be working in the same issues 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Thank you. What if philanthropy were to think about the same thing? And I understand that some foundations have restrictions, there's perpetuity. And so I'm not talking about the fund itself. But what if we were to actually work for something so that we don't have to exist? And so what if we were to work on systems change so that perhaps we can change our entire monetary system so that philanthropy doesn't need to exist? One of the things that really worries me is that philanthropy continues to perpetuate superiority-inferiority complex. At the end of the day, we can say, We have some great funders. We have funders who are still coming along the way. And then we have funding that's still very restrictive. What if that were to change? What if we were to actually tax the top 1% so that our communities have everything that they need to survive, so that philanthropy wouldn't be needed to begin with? What if we could actually create the systems so that your endowments are working to support our communities through direct economic opportunity? What if, just basically, what if we were to actually ask in every application, what is the gap between the highest paid employee and the lowest paid employee of the grants that you're giving? So basic. Because I've been part of boards where the executive director is making a lot of money, and yet they still pay those who are actually doing the work minimum wage. That is unacceptable. This philanthropy, this engagement continues to perpetuate that. And we cannot allow it to happen if we actually care about systems change. So I challenge you all to disrupt the status quo. Ask yourselves, how are we spending our own money? Look at the business side and identify if there's ways that you can actually support local businesses in your community. Compensate individuals for their lived experience. Compensate individuals. You wouldn't ask a consultant to do the work for free, right? What if we were to actually treat our community members as valued partners in this journey? Compensate them. You would not believe how many times we've had to educate funders only to say, thank you for the education, and we're not funding you, after all. Yeah. And so the extractive practices that we're trying to dismantle continue to be part of our sector. And so I challenge you to think about, how am I using my own privilege to also push others to say, this matters. I applaud the Colorado Health Foundation for adding a goal of local vendors. Because that's exactly how we start to build an economy that works for all. Not through charity, but through actual sustainable development. And so I encourage you to think about the ways in which you can make that happen. Because yeah, we're looking at systems change, but remember that systems change starts with you. And so we need to make sure that when we leave this room, that you have at least one way that you can actually go back and say, this is the one that I'm gonna take on. Because philanthropy cannot continue to operate in the way that we've been operating. Charity is not enough. I want to live in a world where people have enough money to buy whatever they need, instead of having to go to food banks and beg for anything. I want people to have dignified jobs so that they can contribute to their own well-being and the common good. Thanks.
So what I'll speak from is, as a funder, how do I change, or how do I try to change the sector? What can we do differently and better? And again, agree 100% with what's said, what has been said. And we need to change as a sector, but I'll say that's not us alone. It's in partnership with you as nonprofits. So it is incumbent on you to sort of come to me and say, this is what I need, this is how much I need to pay a living wage. Because I, as a funder, can't tell you what to pay. And I don't want to, because that gets in the way of, that's sort of also what we're trying to disrupt, is funders telling you how to do your work, how to show up as a nonprofit, how to show up as an organization. And so it's through this trust and partnership, we can have this conversation and we can figure out how to get more sustainable. And that was always the worst question as a grantee. How are you gonna be sustainable when this grant funding goes away? My answer was, I'll get another grant. And when that grant ended, you're like, ugh, where am I gonna get this funding? And so how we've even turned that on its head is to say, it's not you as the nonprofit or organization that owns sustainability. We own it together. And what does that mean? If all I do is fund you, I'm doing a disservice. I have other tools in my tool belt, which means I show up and support to expand your capacity. I help you have the tools to say, how do I grow my organization in a way that is going to be sustainable? How can I, as a funder, bring capacity supports around communication, around evaluation and learning, around organizational structure? How am I showing up as your champion? You should not just have to say, like, which is my funder? You should be able to come to me and say, hey, Lorez, I would love an introduction to these 3 funders. And that's what I'll do, and that is what I do, is that it's my job to make sure you are connected to folks that are going to support your work. So those are one way that funders can show up. The other is putting community at the center. And it's not doing it as a checkbox and saying, hey, we listen to community, that's where we are. But community really, they define what our funding priorities. It's community that told us, we want you to increase access, we want better fit of care, and we want care over time. That's what matters. So that's what drives our work. We also use community members. They're the first ones to look at grant proposals, to tell us what is trusted and what is going to work. So it doesn't matter how the grant is written. It is really about the organization. Are they trusted to do the work? Will they do the work? Are they somebody that they would go to? And then we also use it to change our policies and procedures. So if something that we do is too cumbersome, we'll change it. If we're asking everybody else to be a learning organization, we have to be that as well. We have to walk the talk. We have to do the same we ask of any grantee. And that's what I would encourage every funder to do, is really put community at the center of their work. And so even as we fund youth, we have young people sitting at our table telling us, will this work for them? Rather than adults who think we know. And we are trying to do best, but we don't really know what it is to be a young person now. We don't know what's going to work. And so we really have to listen and lift up that community knowledge, that community expertise, and center everything we do around it. And so there's a lot of ways as funders we can change what we do, even so slightly, to better engage, to better support community. I talked a little bit about our learning. Again, we know that it takes more time, so we added learning dollars to all of our grants this year to compensate for that time to build the learning framework. So we recognize we have to bring those resources to better support you, but this is all done in partnership.
We're going to incorporate one more question from the audience. This one's for Matt specifically. And it's a question about the West Side Mobile Home Park that you spoke to. How did you and your organization go about the challenge of changing the status quo in working on that project?
Well, that particular project, I think the credit belongs to the people in that community. The credit belongs to the residents of that park, because it was them who drove the process, who brought the process to our attention. We played a supporting role. I think that's what I would say we did to change the status quo. Instead of leading the thing, instead of saying this is how we're going to do it and this is how it's going to be done and doing it ourselves, we said, let us support you in figuring it out. And our staff who are not here, Beatriz Garcia, Enrique Orozco, both of them were key. All these meetings, all this time with the community members, some of our board members, same. Working with our local government, our county, our city, getting the funding. Our team working with the folks in that park to help them get the resources and the services that they needed to organize themselves. It wasn't us going out and saying, hey, my name is Matt, I work at Compañeros, and let me tell you about this thing that you need to care about. It was more, let's see what let's let you do it. Let me give you everything you need to do this and connect you with the resources you need. And we can help you with our expertise as an organization. We'll help you navigate these services, but ultimately we want you to drive the process. We want you to be the one who's doing it. So we connected with the folks who are in this park with a number of resources. We connected them with some organizations that helped them figure out how to create a legal cooperative. So we helped people we helped them figure out how to do that, which to me seems like a huge daunting process, but which they did successfully to create a community-owned collective to own this thing. Then we also helped them connect with funders and organizations that were willing to advocate for this cause, spread the word about it, and some that were willing to truly walk the walk and put their money where their mouth was and put down millions of dollars so that this trailer park community could actually buy the place they were living in, which otherwise would have been impossible. even if they had collectively put all their money together today and tried to buy this, it would be impossible because of the cost. But we got them connected with all the resources we need. We helped them get through the thing, and we let them drive the process and direct it. And I think that's a departure from one way that we see a lot of work being done in the current status quo, which is the organization with the priorities of the funder coming down and saying, this is how we're going to do the thing. I think the way we did it is we said, let me see what I can do for you. How can I help you do this? And we let them drive the process and help them through the whole thing.
Thank you, Matt. Wow, how time flies, right? And what a wonderful conversation it's been. We have 5 minutes left. So rapid fire. Everybody, in your closing thoughts, can you tell us a little bit about what you would, what guidance, what wisdom you would share with our audience in terms of what can each of us as individuals, each one of us, do to change the rules of the game and ultimately change big systems?
All right, rapid fire. The educator in me is going to come out. Not wisdom, but homework. I want you all to go back to your places of employment. I want you to go back to your faith congregations and say, can we do better? Are we actually supporting our communities? Are we actually living our values? For those nonprofits in the room, let's figure out how we challenge the status quo. And part of it can be even more power to the workers, more power through worker-led organizations. Let's figure out how we disrupt the system because it hasn't worked and it will not work. So thank you for being here. Truly appreciate you and the role that you will be playing in actually creating an environment where everyone can thrive.
You know, the theme has been, how do we support one another? How do we work together? How do we together change the status quo? And so what I will offer to you, what I will have you do is challenge us. If ever as a foundation, we aren't living to our values, if we aren't doing all that we should be doing, let's have a conversation. And I am here for any of you if you are trying to figure out how you do that the same with other funders. I am happy to be a sounding board. I am happy to participate because, again, it's us together using our words, using our actions to create the change we want to see.
To all the organizations in the room, to the people who work at the nonprofits who are receiving funding, I would say, speak up. If you want these changes, if you believe in these things, that you want more abundance, you want more flexibility, you want more commitment, trust, and power given to you from your funders, speak up and tell them. Really, this is something that I was really afraid to do when I was first starting as an ED, that I had to learn how to do, because in the beginning, I was afraid. I didn't want to have the little funding that I had taken away. We're now in a bit more of a secure position, and I push back more now. If someone's like, we only have this programmatic thing, I'm like, well, I don't really want that. What else can we do here? How else can we figure this out? If someone's like, well, we're only going to spend it on this, I say, really? Because we don't need that, but we do need this. If you want these things, speak up and realize that you do have a lot of power. And for the foundations and the funders, I would say listen. Really listen to what we're saying as nonprofits. Listen to what we're saying about what we need, about what we want to spend on, about what we want to do, and work with us to find a way to make it work. And I've seen that in this room. Some of the funders in the room, the ones I mentioned at the beginning, I think that they're doing a really good job about this. I think that organizations like the Colorado Health Foundation, like the Rocky Mountain Health Foundation, like the Latino Community Foundation for Colorado, I think there's a lot of organizations that are leading this kind of change. And I would say to you as well, funders, listen to us, but also use your power. You can go out and you can get other funders to think like this. You can show them that it works. The Colorado Health Foundation gave out $15 million endowments to organizations across the state so that they could have a sustainable form of funding forever. That would have been unheard of years ago. But by doing that, you're paving the way for that kind of thing to become more normal. So go out there and use your power.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom, and it is wisdom, thoughts, and just experiences with you. Another round of applause, please, for our panelists. Thank you so much. And we're gonna shift gears now and pivot a little bit. So I'm gonna invite us off stage and Karen back on stage so that she can introduce our keynote speaker for the day. Thanks, everyone.
I don't need this unless Richard needs it. Richard, okay. Woo. So what if the funders in the room and the nonprofits in the room all just commit to doing at least one thing we just heard in the last hour? What a difference it would make. So we are going to close this fabulous symposium by offering you a couple of gifts. The first gift is in the form of a human being, and the second gift is in the form of a collection of his work. So let me introduce Richard Blanco. And there's a slide going to come up because he doesn't know we're already like connected. So Richard was the 5th presidential inaugural poet in U.S. history under President Obama. And so in a moment, I think a slide's going to come up, and it'll be a picture of my family and me at that inauguration. So we've been together in the same space before already, Richard. So in being that inaugural poet, he was the youngest, the first Latino, first immigrant, and gay person to have served in that role. He was born in Madrid to Cuban exile parents and raised in Miami. And the negotiation of cultural identity and place characterized his body of work. And I love, one of the things I read, like Carl Sagan introduced cosmology into our living rooms through TV and made it, part of our normal conversation, he's trying to introduce poetry and the transformation it can have in our lives and make it accessible to all of us in our transformation. So Richard, I welcome you to the stage. Richard's gonna do a poem, offer some thoughts for us, and then he and I will have a short conversation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Karen, for that wonderful introduction. I'm curious to see where those physical spaces where we've connected, but I'm sure we've been in spiritual spaces all along. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you here today. As you can imagine, this is not a typical place where a poet gets invited, so I really appreciate that opportunity, the space to share my work and my life with you in the hopes that it will inspire your work and your life. I really want to see that slide, though. It's such a great slide, me and Obama. But anyway, we're going to kick off, as Karen said, things with a poem and then have a conversation and close with the poem. As I always like to say, my poems are way smarter than me, so it's a good way to kick off the conversation. This poem takes its inspiration from several things. I was thinking about how do we find a common ground? What are those stereotypes that we have created in our country of each other? A lot of it obviously driven by the political divide and political rhetoric. So that was one thing. The other thing, that led me to think about the Declaration of Independence. But what's more important than the Declaration of Independence is the Declaration of Interdependence. This is the other space we need to move in as individuals, as a nation. The idea that we're all interconnected, that a community is a big ecosystem and it's all connected in some way. I think the pandemic taught us some of that, right? I think we're also unfortunately forgetting some of those lessons already. So it takes that inspiration, that moment as inspiration, and you'll see that the poem is interrupted by sentences or phrases from the Declaration of Independence. And the third thing was inspired by the Zulu people and the greeting, and their greeting. They don't just say, good morning, in the elevator, all groggy before we get our coffee, right? The idea is that you look someone straight in the eyes and say, I see you. And the response is, I am here to be seen, and I see you. Declaration of Interdependence. Such has been the patient sufferance, where a mother's bread, instant potatoes, milk at a checkout line, where her 3 children pleading for bubble gum and their father, with the 3 minutes she steals to page to a tabloid, needing to believe even stars' lives are as joyful or as bruised. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. Where her second job is serving an executive absorbed in his Wall Street Journal at a sidewalk cafe shadowed by skyscrapers, where the shadows of the fortune he won and the family he lost, where his loss and the lost, where a father in a cold town who can't mind life anymore because too much and too little has happened for far too long. A history of repeated injuries and usurpations, where the grit of his main street's blacked out windows and graffitied truths, where street in another town lined with royal palms, at home with a Peace Corps couple who collect African art, where their dinner party talk of wines, wilted picket signs, and burned draft cards, where what they know, it's time to do more than read the New York Times, buy fair trade coffee and organic corn. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress. We're the farmer who grew that corn, who plows into his couch as worn as his back by the end of the day, where his TV set blaring news having everything, nothing to do with the field dust in his eyes and his son nested in the ache of his arms. We are his son. We're a black teenager who drove too fast or too slow, talked too much or too little, moved too quickly but not quick enough. We're the blast of the bullet leaving the gun, with the grit and the grief of the cop who wished maybe that he hadn't shot. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. We're the dead, we're the living, amid the flicker of vigil candlelight. We're in a dim cell with an inmate reading Dostoevsky, where his crime, his sentence, his amends, we're the mending of ourselves and others. We're Buddhists serving soup at a shelter alongside a stockbroker. We're each other's shelter and hope. A widow's 50 cents in a collection plate and a golfer's $10,000 pledge for the cure. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We're the cure for the hatred caused by our despair. We're the good morning of a bus driver who remembers our name, the tattooed man who gives up his seat on the subway. We're every door held open with a smile when we look into each other's eyes, the way we behold the moon. We're the moon. We're the promise of one people, one breath, declaring to one another, I see you. I need you. I am you. Thank you. Thank you. So I invite Karen back up to the stage for our conversation. Oh, thank you, Ryan.
Oh, I walked off without my microphone.
I feel you've been up and down a lot, right?
You still have your ego. Thank you. Oh, can you see now? There's a picture of my family at the inauguration. It was cold that day.
Yes, it was. Cold but warm.
Yes. So Richard, I see you. the Declaration of Interdependence. Interdependence is not one of the pillars of Western philosophy. And we're talking about the status quo has got to go. The status quo is independence, individualism, pull yourselves up by your own bootstraps. So how do we move from our current philosophy of independence as a United States of America to interdependence?
Sure. So, yeah, it's exactly right. It actually comes from Buddhist thinking or philosophy. That's a big question, but I think one of the ways I try to do it in my poetry is exactly sort of what that poem is doing, is to recognize our humanity, to recognize that there are real stories behind, real stories, real lives, real peoples, real faces that humanize these sometimes concepts or strategies or whatnot that can get really abstracted, right? If you look at even, well, since we can talk about Obama, right? Obama in his speeches always brings in a little example of a real human being, a barber that he went to in Cuba. I'll never forget that story. And I think that starts to break down that kind of stereotype, but also understanding that at the end of the day, our humanity is our common ground, and that we actually, to survive, we need to connect. I mean, besides even we can bring in climate change into this conversation. So I think humanizing things in whatever moments you can, and not just talking in the abstract, I think is a way towards understanding that interdependence. When you see a real life story and what it means to people, and unexpected stories sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yesterday we had some folks talking about stories, and stories are a way to understand people for whom you think you're not really interested in their perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's happened to me more. That's happened, right? And I think it's happening more and more, and I try to catch myself. Just because someone has a red pickup truck does not mean X, Y, and Z, right? And because we're just assuming the story behind it without really listening, and opening the door to that story, not only just telling our story, but inviting that story. And sometimes the story isn't what you want to hear, but still, at least there's people talking, right? There's a sense of connection at some point.
So did you decide to become a poet, or were you called to become a poet?
So a little of both. The narrative, the romantic narrative is, so I'm an engineer. That was my first degree, and have been a practicing engineer for 25 years. But the romantic notion is that, or that my parents made me study engineering, and then one day I started writing poetry, and the clouds parted and the cherubs came down, and like suddenly, but the reality is, like everything in life, it's just little small decisions and baby steps, and just paying attention, following your curiosities, following your intellectual curiosities as well, your creative curiosities. You're just putting yourself out there, and I think that applies to any career, any life, really. And so I just thought to myself, I was working in an engineering office, and I said, what do I know nothing about? Poetry. Let's do that. So I just carried both, and I always like to say I'm a better engineer because I'm a poet, and a better poet because I'm an engineer, because talk about thinking about interdependence, how language is so important, even in engineering, right? And most, the way our educational systems and the way our lives in general are the rhetoric of our lives is that, everything is siloed, that this has nothing to do with that and the other. And reality is, my job as an engineer ended up being 90% writing, communication skills, interpersonal skills, and about 10% engineering by the time I was a senior engineer. So, and I love that. I love that balance.
You actually are kind of going where I was going to go next, which is, and this is an assumption I make. My assumption is that how a poet views the world and how a civil engineer views the world are from two different kinds of lenses. How do you reconcile that? How are they similar or different?
Sure. So part of it is craft-based. So there's more left brain work in poetry than most people are exposed to. And it's like music. So they say, in music, your left brain remembers the lyric, but your right brain remembers the melody, and it puts it together, another kind of interdependence, I guess. So I found that those skills actually overlapped. And again, like I said, as a senior engineer, writing and reading poetry is also a way of study of the human condition, a study of human nature, and a lot of times how to read a room, how to have dinner with the mayor and talk about what the project is about, those kinds of sensitivities that poetry teaches us, that it isn't just about let's get the job and whatnot, and just go in. I think there were some conversations about in the earlier panel, right? Like communication, and poetry taught me how to communicate emotionally as well as be a more effective communicator in many other ways. So that was an overlap. But there's another overlap which is interesting. My obsession, because of my biography, as I like to say, it was made in Cuba, assembled in Spain, and imported to the United States. My mother left 7 months pregnant from Cuba. I was born in Madrid, and 45 days after my birth, we emigrated to the United States. And I think there was an obsession about a home, place, identity, belonging right from the get-go. And as a civil engineer, I ended up specializing in city planning and town redevelopment or town development, and sitting in a room like this with the whole town and basically asking them, what is home to you? And translating that into brick and mortar, but sometimes 2 or 3 years of just communication, again, where the poetry comes in to be able to read people's emotions, what they're trying to say. So there's been a beautiful overlap. I got to start writing poems about some of my projects and would read them in my hard hat at the groundbreaking ceremonies. That was pretty cool.
Do you use your own lived experience in your poems, or observations and understanding of others' lived experience?
I would say every poem in some ways begins as through a lived experience, because even an observation is a lived experience, right? I always tell my students, writing a poem is the most arrogant, stupid, selfish thing you could do in the world. And then I also say, but it is the most generous, selfless, gregarious thing that you can do in the world. Here's what I mean by that. The poem begins with this urgency that you see something, or you feel something, or remember something. And poetry, unlike writing novels, begins with this feeling. You don't even know what it is. You just have this visceral feeling that this is something that I need to explore. And as you enter the poem or start writing the poem, the process of the art, the discipline of the art, lets you unpack what that feeling is. And not only that, discover something else that you didn't even know was in there. Often I'll begin a poem thinking or feeling one thing, and in the process of that art, I end up realizing it's much more complex, much more nuanced, sometimes contradictory, and that those things can exist, and that's actually more true to life. Again, I think, sharing it with all of you here, I think that's a practice we can bring to our lives, to our work, to anything really, to our engagement with people. So in the end, poetry is about my own transcendence, because where I come out at the end of the poem is not the same person where I began it. And I think that happens, that energy is translated to the reader or the listener of the poem. I want to take you on that journey that this art has taken me on to reach a different conclusion. That poem being an example, I sort of came into that poem like, I'm going to give it to the man, you know? And I realized, yeah, but that might be just preaching to the choir, which is fine. But what else am I not thinking about? What am I skipping? What am I really feeling? What am I not asking? What am I not investigating? And so, you saw the poem that landed on that.
Mm-hmm. So once you've completed a poem, and you're different at the completion of it than you were at the beginning, and you offer it to us, and we receive it, how do you want us to be different at the end than we were at the beginning?
I think I'll say poetry, but I'll also say the humanities in general. I think even in this good work that organizations like you do and many across the country and across the world, I think we can also fall victim or prey or get blindsided to facts and figures. This is the way things are done. Here's a chart. Here's like what we're going to do next. So I would hope hope that that poem transforms you into sort of grounding you, first of all, in your own life, because really all this work has to be grounded, founded in a real sense of purpose and mission and an emotional connection, and that can get really lost in our day-to-day, in any job, right, or in any endeavor. So I want you to learn something about your life. That's the simple answer to the question. Often they say, once we finish a poem, the poem is no longer mine. It isn't. It's yours. That poem is yours now to do with wherever it takes you, however it breathes in you. And maybe not today, but maybe next week when you're driving on the interstate, you're like, wasn't that Blanco said? So that is what ultimately poetry is, a gift. I see it as a gift, and let it change. I wouldn't say change is a big word. Let it live, let it breathe, let it ripple in people's lives, and let them have their own personal sort of aha, or their own personal grounding in something that maybe they had been ignoring, as something that replenishes the well. It says, yeah, this is why I'm doing this work, because it's really about something that happened in my own personal life. It's really something really something about my family, really an experience of my community that got me in here in the first place. And so get back into that grounding of the deepest sense of the self that then informs everything else.
In your own poetry, do you think that there's more power in your poetry that makes someone think at the end or makes someone feel?
I think both, but ultimately poetry poetry has so many parallels with music that first it's the feeling. Sometimes, and this is the problem sometimes with poetry education, that we don't allow the student to feel first. They have to think first and then feel second. But the thinking really comes through the emotion. It's kind of like when you hear a song, or even your favorite song, and you've heard it for the 50,000th time. In my mind, I'm going to Carolina, right? I'm not from North Carolina. And
I am.
Right.
James
Another
Taylor.
connection, yeah, James Taylor. It lives in me as an emotion, and then there's always a thought about, okay, what is home? What is place? How am I negotiating where I'm living now? And it leads to a thought, I think. So both. I think that's a great answer to everything, both.
And how much influence of your parents is in you now?
So I think, as I said, going back to my origins of already being 45 days old and belonging to 3 countries and none, it's become the focus of my work, and still for many books. I think I inherited a kind of trauma that they went through as exiles, as immigrants. I think in some ways my writing was a way to esoterically maybe heal them. I think in part my writing was also an urge to document their lives and stories so that they wouldn't be forgotten. And so they still live largely, if not so much in the poetry itself, which has taken another dimension of home, the idea of not my own personal sense of home in terms of my culture and my sexuality or my community, but really home in terms of what is country, right? What is this big word that we all belong to somehow? So they still live with me. My mother's still alive. She's 86. And boy, she's 86, but she might as well be 56. She's still with me. My father passed away when he was young, and that's another urgency to tell the story of the man who he might have been. But they're with me. When I got the call from the White House,
I wanted to ask you about that. Like, what's that like? Like, does Barack Obama call you?
Well, I always say he did, but it's true. I'm a poet. That's poetic license.
Okay. You tell the story however you want to tell it.
I always think, like, my first assignment in graduate school was write a poem about America, and that's basically what I've been doing. By writing about what is Cuban or an immigrant, I've been writing about what, and I felt like saying, don't worry, big guy, I got this one. I've been writing this one forever. But, and that's part of his connection, too, in subsequent conversations, right? His own place in this country, like, what does that mean? How do we fit into this narrative? But I get the call. I was driving in Massachusetts, and this relates to your question, And before, they asked me to write 3 poems in 3 weeks, basically. Before sheer panic or terror set in, I was just overcome with a deep sense of gratitude. Not for this great moment for me, but realizing that all the sacrifices, all the decisions that my parents and grandparents made, their insistence on education. We lived in Miami. We didn't put on the air conditioning so we could have a little bit of a better education and go to parochial school. That all those decisions made me who I am. And even thinking back on it now, I get a little misty, and I had to pull over the side of the road and just started bawling. And it felt like the sense of, I guess it gets back to grounding in the self, right? We think, I'm a poet, I'm at this point 44, I'm like, I'm Richard Blanco, I've done my life, I picked my major, or majors, and we don't realize that so much of our lives, right, are scripted already by the choices that are made for us. Some good, some bad, but nonetheless choices, and that we come in on the 5th act, and that our job is also to take that story, finish it, and pass it, or not finish it, but continue it and pass it on to others. And those questions we had, some of the questions we answered, some new questions that have come up for us, so they live with me still, yeah.
Could you enjoy that in the moment, or was it completely overwhelming and you didn't even know where you were?
Yeah. No, it was an amazing moment, and I wasn't as nervous or terrified as I thought I would be. Part of what's happening is you're sitting on that stage at the platform, and you're realizing that you're in the presence of something much larger than yourself. Much larger than President Obama, much larger than Beyonce, sitting a couple seats over, much larger than James Taylor. You are in service to something greater than yourself. It almost felt like a religious experience, like a spiritual experience. And so the ego abates. The ego says, this isn't about you. This is about our country. And also this overwhelming feeling. Even to that point, I still wasn't sure, as a gay immigrant exile kid, that I quite belonged to the American narrative. I was still thinking, I got to get a Brady Bunch house, and all that. But that moment of just understanding a gay immigrant kid is going to read a poem to the entire country, and it's me.
And the world.
And the world. And it was this sense of, what you were saying about earlier, about a work in progress. I finally felt I belonged to American narrative, not glossy-eyed and all, rose-colored lenses, but it gave me work. And I realized that democracy is a verb, not a noun. We don't have a democracy. We never had a democracy. We work at a democracy every single day in whatever we do. So. And I realized that little moment big moment, was part of that work in progress, writing another chapter, a little chapter that I was part of. And yes, we take 5 steps forward, backwards, 3 steps forward, et cetera, but hopefully we're looking for a story that continues at least and has something in sight. Sometimes it's a rough story to write. Sometimes we don't get to write it. Many people haven't gotten to write anything in that story. And we got to lift them up and make sure they're included in that narrative. So all these things, to answer your question, sort of like I was into this other world. And so do we have time for a little anecdote? Just a fun one. So there's a sound delay. It stretches all the way past the Washington Monument. And I was wondering why the president would take these long pauses at the speech. So as I finished my poem, I hear and if you look at the video, I smirk at myself and I thought, don't quit your day job, Richard, don't quit your engineering job. And then the roar of applause came in, like it's this wave. But yeah, it was a beautiful moment in ways that were larger than myself. And that didn't, don't get me wrong, I don't have nerves of steel, but it wasn't about me at that point, it was about us. It always should be about us.
So I'm hoping you'll let me go someplace with you. that we haven't talked about as a collective, that are huge issues in the Latino community and African American community, and that's colorism. You are a light-complected Latino and could pass as white. What's that been like? How have you experienced that in your life?
It's some of the work I'm trying to do right now, actually. Of course, that exists in Cuban, and I'll speak specifically to Cuban American culture. And as Julia Alvarez is a great poet and novelist says, I'm a white woman of color, right? And so something I didn't quite have to negotiate most of my life, living in Miami, but times have changed, and that's one of the things I'm trying to work on as a teacher, bringing in the rich Afro-Cuban history that we have, understanding. It's interesting because there's a kind of racism or prejudice that's different in Latino cultures that is a little more stealthy and can be almost, I don't want to say more dangerous, but can sort of slip really easily and be perpetuated without being called out.
Can you give an example of that?
Well, for example, my nickname is Negrito,
Okay.
right? You know that, right? And it's like, that sounds like cute or whatever,
Right,
but like, yeah,
we know what that means.
Yeah. Or like, like when I hear my parents tell stories about Cuba, it's like, or something, Juan el Negro, tú sabes, en la esquina, the guy, Juan the black guy, and it's like, little things like that, but also there's this kind of the idea, the blind side that we're not racist because in general, Afro-Cubans have been more accepted into, for reasons that are historical, I'm not going to get into, but then there's this line in the sand that then gets called out, and then so there's this blind side that's like, no, we're not, we're not those kinds of people, to use the cliche, horrible. I have a lot of black friends, right? That kind of thing can get very, very opaque, and so I'm trying to do work with the community in Miami, which is actually, I think, ready for that conversation because there's been a lot more Afro-Cuban immigration, exiles come into the picture, a lot of younger people, and I'm trying to do some work with that to get us to have that conversation.
And along that same line, I know a lot of organizations, a lot of folks in this audience are trying to figure out how to address just the insidious things that may be happening inside their own organization. And we have a group of Latinas here who are learning. We use a lot of terminology, so they didn't understand the term microaggression. Right. But when we explained what it was like, oh yeah, yeah, we got that.
We've had that.
And so, have you experienced that when people don't know who you are? The difference between how you're treated when they don't know who you are and when they know who you are?
Yeah, that happens in more than one context. But I want to say one of those other, I'm not sure it's so micro, but the saying is when someone's getting married, if they're lighter skinned, they're like, but mejorar la raza, they're going to improve the race. And and it's like, ha, 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 ha. But it's like, we should not be laughing at this, folks. This is more than a microaggression. But I'll give you another context. This is as a gay man, that happens as well. When people don't know who I am, and when you choose to tell them who you are or not. And I have to come out every day still at the ripe age of 30.
Me too.
Right, like you get in a cab and there's, cabbie says something about, some girl on the street, something sexual, and you're like, oh God, man, do
Here
I
I go
need to
again.
do this today? Like again. So there's that context. With me, in the other context, it's an interesting thing because as when that passes, so to speak, sometimes even in my own communities, don't recognize me unless I speak Spanish, and then there's this kind of negotiation of, do I speak Spanish? Do I have that connection? Do I not have that connection? And how they treat me differently, do I, there's a constant negotiation. Not so much in Miami, but.
And I think that's important to keep reiterating. People think often because those of us in the audience that are people of color and have reached some level of success as defined by others, that all of that other stuff goes away, that we're no longer discriminated against, that we no longer have microaggressions against us. It's like, yes, they still happen,
Oh, yeah.
very, very much so. And it doesn't, achieving some level of predefined success doesn't negate at all the realities of how the world sees you in general when you walk out.
Yeah. The other infamous one is, so did you come in a boat or, yeah, that one.
How do you respond to that? If you
I-
can say out
If
loud.
I feel like having a teaching moment, because I also feel like sometimes I like being, and then, okay, you got 10 minutes, because I'm going to take you through the whole history
Right.
of that. So and most of the times I feel like the teaching moment, or like my partner Mark says, or husband really says, don't press the Cuba button. But but I wanted to, you make me think something that I think worked that I try to do within my own communities too is, in the sense, yes, when you achieve a certain level of success, there's kind of everything else goes away. But I think I'm thinking it through here now, but I teach Latinx literature and history, basically, is the same at my university. Trying to recognize how we also need to be aware of our own communities and have those conversations, because there are things that need work still, right? Like we're talking about colorism and stuff, and how often we need to do some of that work, as well as how these communities are also perceived and prejudiced against in the larger sphere, but not to know that there's also work for us individually to do and for us to do with our communities to raise us all up.
And how do you use your poetry in your community?
Well, I do a lot of poetry readings, but I mean, part of, like, every poem sort of has, like the poem I just read has these nuances and whatnot, and I try to not just read a poem, but to have a conversation around a poem, comment on the poem. But besides poetry readings and a more tangible, I guess, example, I feel like it comes from very personal, but I had little access to no access to the arts or humanities because of being working class and immigrant and whatnot. So I try to go to schools a lot, middle schools, high schools. I try to have as that's why I love a space like this, where it's not just reading to other poets. I'm sure there's some poets in the room, but using the poetry as a doorway to have these conversations and again, just like the Declaration, it depends on, I have many poems. One of the poems that I have that opens the conversation for even our communities is, for my Cuban Latinx community, is it's called Easy Lynching on Herndon Avenue, which has to do, it's based on a photograph of the present day site of the last recorded lynching in the United States, which was in 1986, recorded. And it talks about how we can turn in certain spaces, we can believe that we're not racist or prejudiced because we can live in bubbles, and yet, are you really not? And so, and I use that with my community, and let me tell you, it takes a lot to stand up to that. And understanding that the relationship between Cuba and the United States would be very different if Cuba were 70-something% white European rather than Afro-Cuban. It would be a whole different conversation. And
That's how I felt about D.C.
Yeah.
When D.C. turns 70% white, a lot of things will change there.
a lot of things, yeah. So I just kind of put a mirror out there and like, here's the poem in a different context, but it's so I use the poem as a not teaching moment, but as a moment for people, again, for get people to think about things in that they're not thinking about or feeling, or maybe are feeling and just need voice. They just need something. Again, I think the Miami community, there's a lot, especially the younger generation, they're ready to have more of those conversations.
Great. Would you gift us with one more poem before you
Sure.
head out? Do you want the?
No, I think I can read it just
Okay.
to make it less clunky. This next poem that we chose is a little more figurative. So it takes its inspiration from clouds as a way of thinking about coexistence. And at first I was like, oh, clouds are so pretty, and as you watch clouds, it's messy, right? And they're not all the same, and there's storms, and in fact, I'm dreading the thunderstorms. I gotta fly out of here today. There's beautiful days, there's bad, there's all kinds of clouds, and yet they coexist in the same space. So this is a little bit of a more abstract poem, but ultimately that's the message. How can we coexist? And I think one of the challenges in general that maybe this poem brings out too is, in a really broad stroke, is one of our challenges as we move forward is how do we acknowledge, right, we're this world that's becoming more and more homogenized in some ways, just through media, communication, economies. How do we keep those stories and our individual identity while recognizing that we're completely interconnected, that we're one entity, or hoping that we can do that? So, Cloud Anthem. Until we are clouds that tear like bread, but mend like bones, until we weave each other like silk sheets, shrouding mountains, or bear the gales that cheer us, until we soften our hard edges, free to become any shape we imagine, a rose or an angel crafted like paper mache by breezes, or a lion or dragon like marble chiseled by gusts, until we scatter ourselves into pebbles of gray puffs, then band together like stringed pearls, until we learn to listen to each other, as thunderous as opera or as soft as a showered lullaby, until we truly treasure the sunset, lavish it in mauve, rust, and rose, until we have the courage to vanish like sails into the horizon or be at peace, anchored still, until we move without any measure, as vast as continent or as petite as islands, floating into an abyss of virtual blue we all belong to, until we dance tango with the moon and comfort the jealous stars falling, until we care enough for the earth to bless it as morning fog, until we realize we're as muddy as puddles, as pristine as lakes, not yet clouds, until we remember we're born from rivers and dewdrops, until we are at ease to dissolve as wispy showers, not always needing to clash like godly yells of thunder, until we believe lightning is not our right to the ground. Though we can collude into storms that ravage, we can also sprinkle ourselves like memories, until we tame the riot of our tornadoes, settle down into a soft drizzle, into a daydream. Though we may curse with hail, we can absolve with snowflakes. We can die valiant as rainbows and hold light like blood in our lucid bodies. We can decide to move boundlessly without creed or desire until we are clouds, meshed within clouds, sharing a kingdom with no king, a city with no walls, a country with no name, a nation without any border or claim, until we abide as one, together in one single sky. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you for your vulnerability, Richard thought we were going to just talk about poetry the whole time. He didn't know I was going to ask him about his life and colorism and all that. So thank you so much for being willing to go there, because I think that's it's the kind of thing we all need to get used to talking about together, and it can't be conversations we're afraid of. So before we close out, first let's bring up, everybody's got their name in the bucket? Okay. There's a lot of names there. So let's see, I'm gonna, yep, just hold it for a second. Oh, wait, here's the winning ticket. We're gonna shuffle them around. All right, deep down. All right, so the first person that gets 5,000 donation to the organization of their choice, I'm gonna not pronounce this correctly, Teo Natson, Maribel? Did I say that? Teo Natson. All right, now so I want you to say it so I say it correctly. Teo Natson. All right. If you'll just take it back to those ladies, they'll find out where you wanna donate it. Where do you think you're gonna donate it?
I don't know. There's a lot of good nonprofits where I'm from. I worked for La Puente Shelter for many years, so maybe them. But
Okay, excellent. All right. That's one. The next $5,000 donation goes to Raquel Galvin. Now, she's from Kids at Their Best. I wonder if that's who's getting the money. She said, oh, yeah. Thank you, Raquel. All right. Then we got, for the third, Levi Murray. From Pueblo Community Health Center. Congratulations. Is that where that money's going? Probably not. Okay, somewhere else. All right, we'll do two more. See, the applause gets less as more people are like, yeah. Congratulations. Good for you. All right, now we have Kalina Wong. All right, Kalina, you know where the donation's going?
I'm not sure. I'll have to think about it.
All right, just thoughtfulness. All right, I'm gonna get one that's a color. So if you fill out a white one, you know it's not you. Amanda Jacqueson. How many was that, Taryn? Is that 5? Okay. Thank you, Amanda. Do you know where you're going to give your donation yet? No. All right. Who's going to promise to come back next year? Okay, then we'll do one more. All right, Amy, you have to adjust the payout. Oops. All right, give me that one. Okay. Rosa Marie, Virgil Garcia. Rosa Marie, I think it's Virgil Garcia. Oh, she's gone. So that's this one then. So I'm going to do this one because she's not here. You have to be here to win. Carolina Ramirez. Thank you, Carolina. Any idea where that money's going yet?
I think I'm going to give it to Una Mano, Una Esperanza.
So while our board chair, Mark Wallace, comes up to close us out, I want to just say thank you, thank you, thank you. for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your attention, for your engagement, for your feedback, for the gifts you brought to us and to each other. Thank you for coming out still in a time when there's still COVID. Thank you for being diligent about wearing masks. We only had the one positive COVID test yesterday morning. And thank you for honoring us with your kind words. And last but not least, beyond thank you to the team that put this together for us. So Jacqueline, Colorado Health Foundation team, Lady K, thank you, Mark. Oh, and the hotel, and the servers, and the food, and the people that fix the room every night. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Thank you. Jessica stole what I was going to start with, to thank all the folks that we might have seen, but might not have seen, for making it possible. So thank you for reminding us. I really want to, in a special way, Karen has thanked all the people that make this possible, but I just want to thank you, Karen, on behalf of the Board of Directors. You have been moving the Colorado Health Foundation into space that we went from being confused and probably uncertain about what to do into a space that is feeling very different. And I want to thank you for, in particular, having the wisdom and the courage and the willingness to be vulnerable, to create and recraft the symposium. I don't know how many people remember the symposium from years and years ago. It was much smaller. It was focused differently. And Karen, you have sort of reconstructed the symposium into creating space for more voice and for more storytelling, so that every year we can go into a deeper conversation that is now really focused on racial justice. And I want to thank you for doing that. And I want to tell you that while not all of our board members could be here, I feel like what I wish they could have been here for is, Karen, I think you've already given us the majority of the annual report. To actually be in a room and be able to listen and learn, which is our job as a board, not only to look at the governance of the foundation, but to really listen and learn, because we have so much to learn, that to be in a room like this and to listen to the stories, to hear the voices, to see the people, to have it filled like this on the last day. I think you've done the annual report. I don't know, some others might say, what else? But I feel like I've had the annual report here. I want to personally thank folks I come to this so that I can listen and learn. I live in this nonprofit space in healthcare and community, and every time I come, you pull like all the pieces get started. I feel hopeful. I learn things I never imagined I would hear. I get angry. And I chose to go to the session this morning about mobile home parks, and if I wasn't angry enough, I thought when you had the video on with a room full of people who look like me, sitting there, taking advantage of people, I thought, oh man, all right, you got me fired up, I'm leaving to go do some more work. I would just like to end on, it was already asked by multiple people. Jessica asked us to do this. Karen asked us to do this. I want to ask again that we all leave and do one more thing, that between now and the next symposium, I am so grateful for so many people who are already tearing down the infrastructure of oppression that exists in this country, but we need more people to get up and move from ally to being accomplices. And so what I would want, I hope that a lot of folks are leaving ready to take more bolts out, more screws out of that infrastructure, because I would love to see this sort of virtual pile of garbage that is that infrastructure torn down and disposed of, and behind it is what we want, which is this just and equitable world. So one thing, even if it's your first step individually or organizationally, do it with somebody, and let's tear it down so that we come back next year and have this image of a huge pile of stuff that we've removed and built up with something that we're all hopeful for. So thank you very much for coming and helping us all learn.
Thank you, Mark. If you have interpretation equipment from the Community Language Cooperative team, please return it over in the corner, and thank you all.